The Judson Board of Trustees is hereby called to order at 6:50 p.m. And for the record, Ms. Eaton did show up at 6:32. I'm very pleased that you've taken time to join us this evening. As the Judson Board of Trustees, we're here to set goals and policies and oversee the management of the district. We're responsible for approving budgets, contracts, personnel, appointments, and to listen to reports from the superintendent. We are not here to make administrative or management decisions pertaining to the daily operations of the district. This is the responsibility of the superintendent. In compliance with the State Government Code on Open Meetings, tonight's agenda has been appropriately posted. This is a meeting in public, not a meeting of the public. As our guests, you're welcome to observe and listen. These proceedings are being video and audio recorded and will become part of Judson's permanent legal record. In order that the tape adequately reflects these proceedings, please silence your mobile devices and refrain from talking while others are speaking. Since it is legally mandated that these proceedings are recorded accurately, I may have to ask for order periodically should I notice that disruptions are interfering with our recording capabilities. Once again, I extend to each of you a sincere welcome from the entire school board. Thank you for your interest in Judson ISD. We've established a quorum, and I will call roll. Ms. Canoyer.
Present.
Mr. Macias.
Present.
Ms. Eaton. Ms. Rodriguez.
Present.
Ms. Pichelle.
Present.
I'm Dr. Melinda Salinas, and to my left, we have our superintendent, Dr. Carl Montoya.
Present.
We will move on to item 2, review of fiscal year 2018 budget information.
Members of the board, again, this is a yearly process that's used to look at the budget of the district, and over the next several months, there will be further meetings as the budget evolves, as the budget process evolves, and then ultimately in a few months, we'll bring the actual proposed budget for the board to approve it for this coming school year. As I stated earlier, one of the issues in general is that we are going to be receiving less money from the state. This includes other districts as well as Judson. And Mr. Elizondo, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Montoya. Good evening, board members. If you don't mind, I'm going to sit for this one. But if you want me to stand up, I'll be happy to get up there. All right, so what we've kind of done for this year to start the budget process, and we do this every year, is we try to give you first a refresher or kind of a where we are today based on the current budget that we have for the current fiscal year, the 17, in this case, it's the fiscal year 18 budget, as well as give you a little bit of historical trend information so you know kind of where the money's coming, just as a reminder kind of how everything works. And then after this presentation, which is going to be for fiscal year 18, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about fiscal year 19, which is the budget we're actually trying to prepare. But first, I wanted to kind of give us a little springboard from here. And typically, we break this up into 2 different meetings. But tonight, we're going to go ahead and we're going to spend a little more time on 18. We'll talk a little bit about 19. But as Dr. Montoya has kind of alluded to or actually mentioned a few times, the budget for next year, we're going to have some issues with the budget for next year. And so I wanted to go ahead and get it started a little bit earlier. Typically, that budget, we don't start discussing until May, is what we've done in the past. But we want to start talking about it now because we're facing some challenges that we need to get out here and somebody can discuss. All right, so first of all, we're going to talk a little bit about there are some legal requirements to doing the budget. We have to make sure that the budget is prepared by June the 19th and that we have to make sure that we adopt it by June the 30th because our fiscal year ends on June the 30th and so our new year begins July the 1st and we need to make sure that it's ready to go for July the 1st. In the budget process, what we do is just kind of I know y'all already know this, but there's planning that goes on for the next year, and then we start preparing, for actually implementing that budget, and then we come back and evaluate that budget throughout the year and make changes as we need to. As I've said to y'all before, that the budget is a living, it's a living budget, and so as we see new changes that need to come through, we will bring this to the board and ask for modifications to be made. And we involve everybody that needs to be involved in the budget. So we involve our principals and directors, all the people that are really controlling the budgets, either their schools or departments. We involve the site-based committees that are within the entire district, be it on a campus or be it here at the district level. The administration all gets involved, and of course the board members when we present to y'all and try to get the budget adopted. There are 3 budgets that are required to be adopted by the school board, and that is the general operating fund, which is again our main fund that we pay everything from buying paper clips to paying for the superintendent to custodians to everything in between. This is where we pay for everything. Then we have the Child Nutrition Fund, which is specifically for paying for our food service program. So the breakfast, lunch program, any snacks like that we serve at the schools go through that fund, and the Interest and Sinking Fund. And the Interest and Sinking Fund is the fund where we pay for our bonds. So the mortgage payment, if you will, for the bonds that we've sold, all come out of that fund, and that's the only thing that fund could pay for. And I'm going to cover each one of them in a little detail. I'm going to spend a lot more time in general operating than I am on the other ones, because that's really the one, that's where our biggest challenge is usually. So the general operating fund, just to give you a little bit of history, we have a few years there, and if you'll notice on all these, the 2017, 2018 year, these are all budgeted numbers. For all the other years, those are all actual numbers, and those are coming from our audit report. So they've been reviewed by the auditors and what have you. So if you look at the local funds there, you'll see that for this year, we budgeted about $94 million, and state funds about $81 million. And if you kind of look down a little bit, you'll kind of see a change where, and this is what Dr. Montoya was talking about, and I'm just kind of bringing this a little to light more so because we're going to be talking a little about this as we talk about the fiscal year 19 budget, that years ago in 2013-14, if you look at the difference, the state was picking up most of the tab for our budget for revenues, and then the local funds were picking up a huge amount as well, but the state was definitely contributing a lot more. And as you start looking up the years a little bit, you'll start seeing where it starts changing, and where now it's flipped, where the school district is locally picking up a lot more money, and that is really the majority of that is coming from taxpayers. Those are our property taxes that our taxpayers are paying. And the state is contributing less funds. And then when you go to the next column, the federal funds and other resources, and I'm going to explain this here to you, that if you'll see it's a huge difference from the prior years, and the reason for that is because of the hail damage that we had in the school district. In that category, we have to include the insurance money that we're receiving to pay for the damages. So you'll see it here on the revenue side, and in a little while I'm going to show you an expense slide, and you'll see it there as well. And that amount is approximately $18.5 million. So if you were to remove that amount from there, it'll bring it back in norm with what you've seen in the prior years. And the TRS on behalf, just a reminder, most everyone's familiar with when you work somewhere and you pay into Social Security, and then your employer pays a matching portion of Social Security. Well, at school districts, we do things a little different. So here, our employees don't pay into Social Security unless they not eligible for the TRS program. But if they are, then they make a contribution towards TRS, just like if you would for Social Security, and the state makes a contribution, the matching portion, if you will. And that's why it's called TRS on behalf. The state is paying it on behalf of the school district. And we have to, for accounting purposes, for pension accounting, we have to show that in the revenue, and you'll see it in a minute. It'll be the exact number on the expenditure side. So total revenue for this year, it's at $210.6 million, and again, about 18.5 of that is coming from the insurance for the hail damage at this point in time. And I'm going to just go through, but please, if you have any questions, just ask me as we go through so we can try to answer them. This is just kind of showing you in graph form what the way that breaks out. So you'll see that for this particular year now, 45% of the revenue is coming from local, which again is a property tax, and 39% is coming from the state, where, as I mentioned before, that was a little different before. It was flipped. Now, this is on the same general operating fund, but it's on the expense side. So on the expenses, you'll see that the majority of our funds are being spent on salaries and benefits, and that's typical for all school districts. And typically, the range that you're looking at is if you stay within a 78% to 81%, then that's kind of where you need to be, or that I shouldn't say that's where you need to be, but that's typical for the school districts, is that they're in that range. The professional, that 6,200 category, is when we're paying for utility bills, and that's the largest component that's there. When we're contracting out, another big component that's there in our school district, and not only ours, many school districts, for special education, it's very difficult to hire all the different, it's like occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech therapists. So a lot of them we have to contract out with, and that's why that number is also so large, because it gets paid out of this fund, and it's shown included in those numbers. In the 6,300s, when you get to that, that's all the general supply stuff that we buy, and I mean that's just everything from cleaning supplies to anything you can think of is in there. And that number this year has a little bit of that hail damage claim, because some things are not capital assets; they're under the $5,000 limit. If we replaced certain items here and there that were damaged by the hail, so that number is a little slightly inflated this year because of that. And then the other operating costs of 6,400s. There, the largest numbers that are included in there are going to be like our insurance, where we're paying for our property insurance, not employee insurance, but just property insurance. That's the most significant number there. And then the debt service, the 6,500 account, that's paying for the loan that we have when we bought buses. That's showing the principal and interest payments for the year that we budgeted. And the capital outlay, again, $20 million. As you can see, the prior years has been a lot less than that. That $18 point something million amount is definitely impacting that, and that's why it's so high there. I'll keep going to the next slide. Here again, just showing you kind of in graphic form. And a minute ago, I mentioned to you about payroll. What it should be more like in the 80s range. Well, you see here it's 73. And what's happening is because of that insurance claim money that's in there, it's throwing off the percentages because we're putting another $18.5 million in there, so it's skewing this number, it's making it look like it's smaller when it's really higher than this.
Mr. Elizondo,
Yes, ma'am.
I don't see on the pie chart the debt service.
The debt service is tiny. It shows it as a 0%.
Right.
It's up there between the 9 and the 1, but it doesn't. It's so small because it's only like $300,000 that it almost doesn't. I mean, it doesn't show up. It's not. It doesn't calculate to a percentage.
Thanks.
Sure. Sure.
You calculate the percentage without the 18 million? Do you happen to know what
On the next
percentage?
slide,
Okay.
one or two slides. It's not showing this form, but I'll show it to you in a second. Sure. So yeah, it's this slide. So here, when we again, this is just talking about general operating fund, and it's specifically talking about payroll. And we do this particular slide only because that is the largest expense for our school district is a payroll. So you can kind of look at every year, get a little trend going there. And if you look at the column that's labeled total payroll, you'll see that if you start at the bottom, it starts like at 82% and goes 84. Well, that percentage includes the column immediately to its left, which is at TRS on behalf. So if you take like that one that's like 84% and you pull out the 4%, then you're at 80%. And you'll see that's pretty much the as you go further up there. But so if you get to that top one, and when I did the numbers to take out, it's not showing on here, but we were back at the 79–80% range when you take out the hail damage, the $18.5 million. Like I said, it's not shown here, but I did go do the calculation just to make sure we were still falling within that range, and we are. We're right. It was right under 80%. And the other thing on this, that I want to point out here, if you look at 1112 for the column that's labeled TRS, you can see that it was $1.9 million. And if you'll look at the drastic change between that and the current 27-18 year, now we're at $5 million. And that's happening because as the TRS program has trouble sustaining itself, the state continues to make the school districts contribute more and more to that. Now, that's not the amount we're taking from our employees. Okay, that's not the amount the employees contribute. That's what the district is contributing based on what we're paying employees and all the different insurance programs and everything that TRS and the state is saying we need to contribute to. So when you're looking at what's happening to some of our money, that's some of it right there. It's going to help the TRS program. Yes.
And again, you said that's because the state is
yes,
withdrawing so much money.
We're mandated to do that. Yes, it's set by the state, the legislators and the TRS board. They kind of work in unison to set those percentages. Sure. And again, this is just another, and I belabor a lot on the payroll because this is, like I said, the biggest part. So this just gives you even a further breakdown of how we spend our money. So just if we can look at the two highest numbers or three on here, if you look at the one that's labeled 6119, that's the salaries, that's the account that we pay for all of our payroll for all of our professionals, our teachers. So you can see that that's a large number, $107 million, actually almost $108 million. And then the next one down, you see it's the largest number is at 6129 account, which is where we pay for all the hourly employees. So all the, everywhere from your bus drivers to custodians to maintenance workers, they're all paid out of that particular account. Teachers' aides, secretaries. And so that's $28 million there. And those are the two largest numbers. And again, you can also look at our health insurance number, which is at 6142 account. If you kind of look at it too, how much we contribute, the district contributes for health insurance for our employees. If you look at back at 1112, we were contributing about 6.8 million, and now we're up to like $9.4 million. So the board, definitely has made a huge commitment to helping the employees with their health insurance costs by contributing that amount of money to the program for them. And again, you'll see that TRS on behalf. Again, there's an offsetting revenue to that account. And the one that just says TRS district contribution, that's the number I just mentioned to you a minute ago, saying that that's increased from the $1.9 million to the $5 million to help TRS sustain their program. Actually, I keep saying their program, it's really our program, but, you know, we all retire, when we retire from there. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Okay, so this one also is a slide for the general operating fund on the expense side, just showing you by expenditure category, kind of how much we spend, and there's going to be a chart in a minute about this, but kind of showing you where our money goes. And that first column, that first row, excuse me, where it talks about instructional, and that's where you want to spend your money, because that's what our core business is, to make sure that we're paying for, again, it's for the teachers, all the instructional materials in the classroom, all those things go into that, the library, all those costs go into that particular code. So that's, the money is being spent where it should be being spent. Again, when you look down and you look at the one that's labeled 0080 capital outlay, again, that's showing the majority of the hail damage is in that account. So that's why when you look across, it seems like it's a big increase, and that's why it's like that. I'm going to go on to the next slide. Here's kind of showing you the graph form, and the biggest piece here again is your instructional, 58%. When we pull the hail damage out of here, it jumps up to like 63, almost 64%. And that's kind of, you know, at one time, the agency was kind of wanting everybody to be at 65%, but then after researching it, they determined there was really no correlation between the amount that we're spending on instruction and how well the kids were doing, so they backed off of that. But truly, I mean, that's where we need to be spending our money, and we do spend almost 64, 65% on that particular category. I want to go on to the next slide. Yes, ma'am.
On the pie chart, so teachers are included in instructional leadership.
They're included in instruction. Instructional leadership are like your principals on the campus. And I'm sorry, instructional leadership is Function 21, which is really the people that are like in the curriculum and instructional department.
Oh, okay, okay, so that's at.
And it actually, I'm going to back up one slide because it actually includes them too. Yes, it does. It includes all the principals, everybody on that is the administration for a campus, and anybody who is in the curriculum and instructional department, mostly curriculum, like it works at central office in curriculum, is in that area. But if they're the actual, like the specialists, the specialists are actually in the first category in instruction. So it just depends on where you fall, how you're coded, what function is where you're at. But the majority of the money that you're seeing in instructional leadership is going to be your campus administration.
Okay, then is administration district office?
Administration
And
is
the
district
ERC?
office. Yes, and so let me clarify that. Even though we consider this administration in the ERC, we have different people here have different functions, so they're coded to different expenditure functions as well. So for instance, technology is located in our building, but they're coded to a function 53, which would be under the part that's called plant services. And we have people in this building that are coded to function 21, which are in the instructional leadership. And we have people in this building that are coded to function 13, which is in the instruction. So it's not as easy as that. Now, when you look at the building next door, everyone, let me just make sure, let me go through my brain here real quick. Everyone there is coded to function 41, which is administration. Yep.
That's why it was so difficult last year when I asked you for that breakdown. Just 3 functions.
Oh, sure.
And you said, but it's not that way.
It's not that simple. I wish it was simple. My brain would appreciate it, but it's not that simple. I'm going to go on to the next slide. So here, this is just a summary of what the information we covered. The first column just shows you for the 2017-2018 year, shows you the revenue and other resources. And again, that hail damage, the 18.5 million is in that number, so that's why it's a little skewed. And there's a note at the very bottom of the slide that shows you that it's in there to kind of for you to know that. And on the expenditure side, it's the same thing. We have that $18.5 million there. And if you can kind of look a little bit at the next column, it's called the unreserved fund balances, and you can kind of look at historically where we're at. Well, you'll see that from 16-17 to 17-18, we had a pretty significant decrease, and that decrease has to do with the raise that was given this year. It was about $5 million, 4 plus a little bit here and a little bit there for the little things that we did with the custodians and things like that. So it ended up, so you can see there's a pretty significant decrease in the budgeted fund balance. That's going to go, so it's going to go from 25% of our expenditures down to 19%. So just keep that in mind, because we're going to come back to that in a little bit when we get to the fiscal year 19 budget preparation and planning. Any questions on this particular slide? Okay, I'm going to keep going. And this is a slide we added a few years back. Some of the board members went to, y'all can correct me, I don't remember, I always forget this, I always have a problem, if it's SLI or LSI. I think SLI, yeah, I always forget, I don't know why I can't ever remember that exactly, how that goes, but anyway, this is a slide that they share with the board members, and after that meeting, some of the board members came back and said, hey, can we do this? And we said, yeah, we sure can, so we included it in here. And what the idea here at that presentation that I attended it, is that they look at it like if it's an alligator, that top one with the blue line and the red line. And what they always tell you is when you see that red line starting to open up, like the alligator mouth opening up, then you're starting to have a problem, and you need to do something about it before it opens up too wide, and then you end up in a really bad situation. So here you can see that it's starting to do that. Our expenditures are exceeding our revenues, and you can see by the green line at the bottom that we're actually starting to hit fund balance. So we're starting to take some money out of fund balance, which we also showed you in the prior screen when we showed, fund balance was going to decrease about $5 million based on our current budget. Any questions here? Okay, go to the next one. And this is just a dramatic representation of the fund balance, just kind of showing you again how it's going to decrease from that, again, budgeted from $47.5 million to $42.9 million.
Can I ask a?
Sure.
So it looks like in the past, we've held a fund balance versus expenditures ratio of about like 22 to 25%-ish. What would we need to get our fund balance up to be back in that ratio, even on the lower end of that ratio to start with, but?
Okay. I'm going to
Is that maybe on the next, is that coming up?
No, it's
Okay.
not. It's not. No, I didn't put that on here. And I'm going to also go back and say something too. That 19.63 is a little bit skewed because of the hail damage. So if we were to take out that $18.5 million, you see that column says expenditures and other uses? If we were to remove that $18.5 million from there and then redo the calculation, we'll do it for you in a little bit. Do you have your phone? Can you do it real quick? Tell me. We'll let Nicole, I'll keep going. I'll come back and tell you in a minute where we are so it'll give you a truer representation of what that fund balance is going to be. Okay, because it's a little skewed right now because that number's in there. Okay, so I'm going to move forward, okay? Okay. All right, so the next fund we're going to talk about just very briefly is a child nutrition fund. And this one, again, is the fund where we pay for all the food service, all the meals that our students eat and some teachers. And that's the only thing this fund can be used for. And I'm going to go through this one a little bit faster than I did the general operating fund, but please, if you have any questions, let me know. So here, the main takeaway is that the majority of our funds for this particular fund come from the federal programs, from the federal government. So if you look at the column that's marked, that's labeled federal funds, other resources, you'll see that that's where the money comes in from mostly. And again, that's because the federal government pays for all the free and reduced lunch programs, or the majority of it, as well in the local funds being the next place where we get our money from. And those are the kids that do pay for their full meals and other folks that eat in the cafeteria, whether it be teachers or what have you. But you can see the majority is coming from the federal programs. So I'm going to go to the next slide, talking about expenditures for that same fund. Here you can see that it's interesting because long time ago before I started working here, I worked in another school district where our labor costs were significantly higher than our supplies and material costs. In other words, we were paying more for labor than we were paying for the food that we were buying to prepare for the students to eat. And in our district, to my recollection, has never been that way. It's always been where we're always paying for food more than labor, and that's kind of a good thing. So that's why this fund has been has been able to sustain itself for all these years. We've never ever had to transfer money from the general operating fund to the food service fund. And I know there are a lot of districts that do just that because they don't have enough money in the food service fund to sustain their operation. So that happens a lot, and we've been fortunate not to have to do that. As a matter of fact, there are some years where we had too much fund balance, and we had to go and write some corrective action plans to the Texas Department of Agriculture as to how we were going to spend down our fund balance, because we're only allowed to have a maximum of 3 months of your operating expenses in fund balance in that fund. And so this is just a real quick recap of the revenues for that fund for this year and some history, and the expenditures for that fund. And you can see we're still going down a little bit. And really, once we get to this level that we're at now, anywhere between the 12 to the 18, 20%, you're good. You don't have to spend it down anymore. Now it's just a matter of maintaining it. And the interesting thing that's going to happen, and I don't know if it's this year or next, the federal government requires that we charge X amount of money to the students. So even though if we're doing well, we have to go back and increase lunch prices, you know, for the kiddos. And so, because they require we do that. So when we do that, then it brings more money into it. So then we have to get plans to make sure that we spend the money. So we kind of get into this little thing once in a while. But that fund is doing very well, has for many, many years. It's always managed very well.
So what is the difference in the drop from 16-17 to 17-18?
I can tell you that it's going to be capital expenditures that they did, like they bought equipment and things like that, and it was purposefully done. They, like I said, they were trying to spend that money down to be able to stay within the guidelines that the state of Texas or the federal government has for those particular funds. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, you're right. And the other thing Dr. Phil said is that, right, we also gave raises as well this year to all the child nutrition employees as well. They were part of the compensation increase when we did that. And then they did a little bit, even beyond that, I think you'll remember we did another little adjustment for some of them as well. I say little, it was pretty meaningful, but it's still little comparatively. All right, so this is that same chart that we were talking about a little while ago. And again, purposely, when you're seeing that red over the blue, we were doing that on purpose in this fund and drawing down that fund balance, as you can see with that green line. But now you should start seeing it just stabilize now, where it just starts leveling off. And the next one we're going to cover real quickly is the interest and sinking fund. This one is very simple because there's not much in here. The majority of the money that comes into this fund is from our taxpayers. They pay for the principal and interest payments for the bonds. We do receive some state assistance, as you can see, and that fluctuates throughout the years. It just depends on which bonds are outstanding and what the payments are like and what we're eligible for. But you can see that the majority of it is from our local taxpayers. On the expense side, like I said, the only thing you can spend this money on is making those payments, those bond payments, and that's where it's all going to. When you see that column that says other uses, that's when we refund bonds. That has the accounting entries that are required to be made go through that fund, and that's why it kind of throws those numbers off a little bit. Yes, ma'am.
Can you go back to that,
Sure.
the previous chart, please? So in 13-14, other resources, there were other resources, 15-16. What are those other resources?
When we refund bonds, like when we
Okay.
take bonds and we refinance them for lower interest rates, they have to go through this fund because we typically, those funds, well, not typically, all the construction projects have always already been completed. And so the money, anything that has to do with those bonds are only mortgage payments, if you will. Again, the bond principal and interest that's due. So when we refinance them, it has to be run through this fund
Okay.
to show how much money we got in, and then we send it right back out to somebody else, whoever we sold it to, but now at lower interest rates. So again, this is the same slide, just with the expenditures, though, showing again just the principal and interest payments. And you can see our annual payments have been in the about $30 million range, approximately, because that's usually, that's what's in that number, the 6,500. That's what the principal and interest we've been paying for those years. And this is just a little recap of how that looks. Again, it's a little bit skewed because whenever we have those other uses in there, it throws the percentages off. And maybe in the future we can look at doing that a little bit differently, but we've always had that issue with this particular fund whenever that happens. But still, there's a very healthy fund balance in here. I think the fund balance in the interest and sinking fund is up to like between $8 and $9 million. And so that's very, very healthy. I know when we go to the rating agencies, they're very pleased to see that in there all the time. They know that if for some reason we have some issues with collections, that there's going to be enough money in there to make those payments. And this is that slide, but the situation here is that the blue line and the red line are right on top of each other, so you really can't even see them. And that's because we're only allowed to collect revenue to equal our expenses are very close. And so that's why it's like that. And the reason it went up real high and then came back down is because, again, we had the other resources in there from the bond refunding in that year and those years that it's showing. And then this year in 17-18, we didn't have any refundings to do this year. We sold bonds, but we didn't do any refundings this year. So that's why it's down like that. Okay, that's it for that presentation. If anybody has any questions, then let me see. So that percentage you were asking about earlier, when you recalculate it, it's 21.44%. Thank you, Nicole. Does anybody have any questions about that particular presentation? Okay, thank you.
I guess I should ask, what more are you going to present, Mr. Elizondo?
Yes, he has 2019 budget preparation, the next item.
Okay, and, okay, I'll wait to hear that.
We'll move on to item 3, fiscal year 2019 budget preparation workshop.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Elizondo.
No, you're fine. Sorry about that delay. Okay. This is the part where I don't look forward to, even though I didn't look forward to the last one I just shared with you. All right, so we're beginning to, well, I say beginning, we really have been talking about this since, with the cabinet members, since September, October, trying to think of different ways to try to minimize what I'm going to show you. And right now, we're going to have our first discussion with the board, and then we'll kind of go from there, once y'all give us a little kind of a consensus or direction as to what y'all would like us to do, or tell Dr. Montoya what y'all would like us to do. So, again, this is for next school year, for 18-19 school year. We're going to really just focus on the general operating fund. As I mentioned to you, the other two funds, they pretty much are okay. They take care of themselves. We will eventually address them as well. But this is the one that we really have to tackle right now, because this is the one that's going to cause us some issues. So, y'all probably remember. I didn't, so I'm really not expecting y'all to. This is from last year, when we did the budget adoption. At one of the meetings, we had a slide like this, and there's two slides we're going to show you from last year. And this was kind of showing you when we adopted the budget for fiscal year 18, where we were going to be. So when we originally adopted the original budget for fiscal year 18, we actually had a surplus. We had a surplus of $313,000. But that's because we had 4 rows up, you'll see, or 4 rows there kind of in the middle, you'll see a one-time construction reimbursement. We had $4.4 million coming in from the construction fund for Veterans Memorial High School. That we had lent them some money and they were coming back. And also because you'll see that other row that says class size increase, $5 million. So what that did at that time is we changed the student to teacher ratios, and we didn't hire 77, approximately eliminated about 77 positions. Now, we didn't have to let anybody go because they were done through attrition. They were just vacancies that were not filled. And so that's where the $5 million savings came from. So that year, even though it's showing you that there was a $313,000 surplus, it's because we had two things happening. We had $4.4 million coming in, and we had a $5 million reduction in expenses where we didn't fill some positions that typically we would have filled. Go on to the next slide. So we also kind of showed this slide last year, and it was kind of telling you, all right, this is where we're at. We're starting at that for 18-19, looking forward. What we're trying to show you is whatever we did in 18 was going to impact what was going on for 18-19. So we put up this slide where it starts up there at the very beginning saying, once we adjusted for that $4.4 million and that size, the reduction in class size, we were going to start off with a $9 million deficit, okay? And then we added back some things, though. We said, well, the retention incentive that was in there, we're not going to do that except for, the retention incentive, we're not going to do that anymore. So we added back $1.8 million that we were able to recover because we only did it this one year. And then we said, well, but we're going to have some growth too, because we're going to be opening up 2 new elementary schools, and we're going to open up another grade level at Veterans Memorial High School, and we have some JSTEM, another grade level for JSTEM. So we, at that time, estimated approximately $4 million of additional costs. So we said, well, when we look at next year, we're going to have this $11.2 million situation we're going to start off with. And then we kind of went through with some scenarios and looked at, well, if you do this raise or if you don't do a raise, and kind of gave you some ideas as to where we were going to be at. And we did some other little adjustments in there. So we said, well, once we really look at it, if we give a raise, we're going to be at a $10.4 million, we do the class size increase and we do the raise, we're going to be at a minimum of a $10.4 million deficit to start the 18-19 budget. All right, so I'm going to fast forward now to a little bit, a few months later. So we prepared a few slides, and I'm not, typically I give you all this detail about how much money we're getting for like each particular line item from the state. We're not going to do that at this meeting. This is going to be the more like the 50,000-foot view where we're just going to look at it to kind of give you all an idea where we're at. So this particular slide is showing no tax rate increase, and it has some different scenarios there at the very bottom, where the first column that's marked scenario or labeled scenario 1 shows that there's no property value increase. In other words, that we didn't add any new properties to the school district, and the appraisal district did not reappraise properties. That's not really realistic because there's always new properties coming to the district, and the appraisal district's always out there reappraising our properties so they can charge us, tell us that they're worth a little bit more. We become instant millionaires somehow. But anyhow, the column that's a little more realistic is that scenario 2 in the middle. Last year, when we looked at what happened there, we actually went all the way to scenario number 3, where our property increase was more like, that we could use was more like at a 5 to 5.5% rate. So we went ahead and did another column with that. And it's very hard to predict what the property value increases are going to be because it just depends on whatever the appraisal district tells us. And I'll share a little more information about the conversations we've had with them in just a moment here. But you'll see here, like in that scenario 1, we were going to start off our fund balance that we're estimating, and we rounded all these numbers up too, so we were not dealing with dollars here and there. So we started off with $43 million with this next school year, with 18-19. And then we looked at our revenue forecast and said, okay, we're going to get about 181. With that scenario, with no property value increase, no tax rate increase, we're going to get about $181 million in revenue total, and we're going to spend about $197 million in expenditures. So we're going to have a deficit of $15.9 million if we went that route. So if we did absolutely nothing and we just let the year move forward, and there was no tax rate increase, no property value increase, and we just opened our schools, we did the Veterans Memorial High School, the 2 elementary schools, we would take that fund balance from $43 million down to $27 million. We would take a $16 million hit in one year, which obviously I would not recommend that we do that. So if we look at the next scenario, scenario number 2, kind of shows you the same situation. We're all starting at the same place, $43 million fund balance. And what's changing here is the revenues. And the reason the revenue's changing is because in that particular column, we're saying there's a 3% property value increase. And so with no tax rate increase, let's say the appraisal district comes back and says we're going to have a 3% property value increase, then you can see that our deficit goes down to $12.9 million or $13 million. And so our fund balance goes down to $30 million if we were to do that. And the last column, which is not impossible, but it's, 5% is kind of hoping that we do the same thing this year, and it may happen. We'll just have to wait and see. So if we went that scenario and calculated the revenue that way, then we would have a $11 million deficit, and our fund balance would go down to $32 million. I'm going to keep going, give you some more scenarios on the next page, if that's okay. Okay. This is kind of the same thing as far as scenarios at the bottom, the no property value, 3% and 5%. The only thing that's changing, which is a big change, and this is just, please, this is just one thing that we're wanted to just discuss, and we kind of talked about this, not kind of, we did talk about this last year, and that was looking at our tax rate. We have not gone up in our tax rate. I can't remember, I'd have to go back and tell you exactly, but it's been a very long time since we have not gone up on our local maintenance tax rate. And I can tell you, and I don't know if y'all read an article in the Herald this week from one of our neighboring school districts, where they're talking about doing the exact same thing, because as Dr. Montoya talked about at the beginning of the meeting, this is not a Judson-specific issue. This is an issue that is, well, a big part of it is not Judson-specific. It has to do with state funding and how the state is funding school districts. If you all remember last year when we were doing the adoption and we were talking about and saying, please don't do the salary increase because it's going to really hurt next year, even more so than this year. And we talked about Northeast ISD because their superintendent had put out something saying, you know what, we're not giving salary increases this year because we can't afford it, and we're contemplating doing a 2-cent property tax increase to the tax rate next year. They're right now, and we'll talk a little bit more in another slide about what Northeast is doing. But anyway, I just wanted to just go along with what Dr. Montoya said, is that it's happening at a lot of school districts. If you go and read on some of these sites like texasisd.com or any of the other sites, and you'll see that a lot of districts are going through the same issues, and it's all coming back to the same thing. The state has, going back to that slide I showed you earlier, the state has greatly decreased how much they're paying school districts, and so everybody's starting to have a really hard time. In addition to that, some of the decisions that are made at the school districts also impact that, In our case, you know, we had talked about, we're opening 2 new schools. Every time you do that, especially when you're doing a high school, that we're gonna take some heartache there as we open that school, because it's always hard to do that. We'll see how this year turns out, a decline in enrollment. So some of our kids, and there's a slide I'll show you about that in a minute here as well, we're presuming charter schools, and so that's hurting us. There are a number of factors that are there. We gave a raise, that's hurting us, because that's a $5 million right off the bat, and it's an annual, I mean, it doesn't go away after 1 year, it continues to be there. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to continue with the reduction in staff, or the student-teacher ratio increase that we did last year, because that's another $5 million that we reduced, and we can't bring those people back. And as a matter of fact, we're gonna talk about that in a minute to see if we continue down that road even further to do some other things. But anyhow, so if we just go through scenario 1 here, and we do the 5% tax increase, and that is something that has to go to the voters. It's not something we can just do. The voters have to approve it, so we can even do that. And we have no property value increase. You'll see that our revenue goes up, because obviously we're collecting more money from our taxpayers. And also, when you increase your tax rates, the state gives you more money as well. So you're getting a little bit more money from the state, more money from the local taxpayers. So you'll see that now you're having a deficit of $7.3 million, or your fund balance is decreasing from 43 million down to 35.7. A little more manageable, still not great, but more manageable. Then you go to scenario number 2, where, you know, we're doing a 3% property value increase, which we feel that's a realistic property value increase. So we think that's a safe number to use, as a 3% property value increase. And there, if the voters were to approve a 5-cent tax rate increase on their tax rate, then you would see that there we end up with a $4 million deficit, and our fund balance goes down to 39 million from that 43. And scenario number 3, again, is just based on more of the last year's property value increase. You'll see there that we do, and that's again with the 5-cent tax rate increase, that our fund balance gets hit $1.9 million. Of course, you know, scenario number 2 and scenario number 3, a lot more manageable. We could definitely deal with something like that without having to do anything more than just doing the tax rate increase if those property values come through. So I'm going to keep going if that's okay, and we can always come back if you all have a question in a minute, because these are the only scenarios that I'm going to show you as far as these kind of calculations. Because as y'all can probably think, we can do as many scenarios as y'all like, and there's a lot of different things out there. Yes, ma'am.
What happens to the money from the lottery? I thought that they said that, yeah, I know it's funny, right?
Well, it's not funny, I'm sorry that I laugh, because that question, you know, a lot of people out, you hear it,
Because I've been trying to find out where that money mysteriously goes for
Sure.
a long time.
Sure. You know, I've heard different things about it. I've never really had researched it myself, but what I've heard is that, of course, some of that money goes back to reinvest into the program, to the lottery program. And some of that money goes into the general fund for the state, and they use it for all their different expenses. And the last time I heard something, which was a few years back, is they said they were going to dedicate a certain amount of it to come to the school districts. And I think that's what they're doing. I just don't know what that percentage is. But my understanding is that they do dedicate a certain percentage to go to school districts. And the rest of it goes to the general fund, and the state uses it for highways and the Medicaid program and whatever else that they have to fund from the state level. Thank you. Sure. But if you like, I can definitely research it deeper and get you some more specific answers. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go on to the next slide. So that 5-cent increase, just to kind of give you, and I'm just giving you this information not because I'm saying that this is the right way to go, but only just to share what the impact would be, so you have a little bit more information, so you, as you kind of think through it and you visit with Dr. Montoya to kind of tell us what y'all think, you know, we can kind of go in whatever direction y'all tell us to. So I know an individual who owns a house who is valued at $90,000. Now, if the appraisal district goes up a little bit and says, okay, we're going to reappraise, know that that $90,000 home is going to be revalued, and if it's revalued by 5%, you know, it's going to go up $400 to $500. So it just depends on what it is. But we're just, to be able to do these, we're going to just say the numbers are static. So that person who owns a $90,000 home, and if they have the homestead exemption, if they were paying the school district $926, that with the 5-cent tax rate increase would go to $958. So annually, that would be $32. And similarly, for somebody with a $155,000 home, or $155,520, which is the average price of a home in the Judson Independent School District, at least it was for this year, 2017. That's how we come up with that weird number with the $520. that increase for our taxpayer in the house, in the average of the school district would be $65.26. And somebody with a $200,000 home, it would go up $87.50 if the board decided to go that route. Okay? All right, I'm going to continue on. All right, so we were talking a little while ago about enrollment versus ADA. And there's a couple of things this slide's telling us. On that first line on top, and it's reflective in both, but that's kind of what our enrollment is right now, or has been the trend. You know, back if you look at 2007, 2008, we had 20,600 kids. This year, we have 23,113, give or take a little bit. It changes every once in a while there, but it's around that number. And you can see that in year 2014, 15, let's see, we were at 23,292. At that point, we were increasing every year. We were growing about 200 kids per year. So you can kind of see what happened to us there. Not only did we not increase 200 kids, we lost students as well. So those students are the ones that we're talking about, that both the ones we didn't gain plus the ones that we're losing are going to charter schools. And you can see that happening more so in year 2016-17 and year 2017-18. And when that happens, you know, it takes a toll on the school district because sometimes we already have hired the teachers for those kids and the kids don't show up. So we have expense in the classroom and we're not getting any revenue from the state. So it's starting to hit us both ways. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this chart is if you look back at 2007, 2008, and you look at what the difference is between that enrollment and the ADA, it's about 94.2%. And if you look at 16, 17, and we didn't use 17, 18 because it's not actual numbers, but 16, 17 are, you'll see that it's 92.58. And you can tell just by how the chart opens there, the distance between those two lines, that we're having students absent more, or at least, you know, when you compare to 10 years ago to now, to the 16, 17 school year. And so that, and I'm not trying to really create a philosophy as to why it's happening, more so just showing the dollars that just in that difference of that, you know, 1.5, 2% that's showing there, that's about $2.3 million per year that we're losing in state revenue. And that's not even accounting for the difference between the ADA number and the enrollment number. That's just the difference between 10 years ago, how many kids are showing up versus how many kids are showing up now. And if you look at that 2.3 and you say that, well, if we had that for the past 4 or 5 years, it adds up. You know, it's 5, 6, 7, $10 million before you know it. So it's impacting us, the attendance difference between whatever the philosophy was 10 years ago to kids coming to school now. Yes, ma'am.
So with our ADA, just with absences, I was just talking with Ms. Bushell, that includes suspensions, correct? Whenever you're absent from school?
If you are...
And that includes a suspension. I'm curious
yes,
what
you're out
the
of school.
suspension rate was percentage-wise in 2007, 2008 versus last year.
I don't have that
Just curious,
number.
like
We can definitely...
absences,
Sure.
kids being absent versus being suspended.
Sure, no, very,
What
very
those
good
numbers
question.
are like.
Sure, very good question, and we can look to see if we can find some of that data to bring it back to you. But I just don't know it off the top of my head, sorry. And then, of course, if we were able to even get that percentage, you know, the ADA besides just the difference, but actually getting closer to the enrollment, then definitely we could pick up a lot more money that way as well.
And as far as you know, Mr. Elizondo, there's not been a major shift in personnel that's been responsible for ensuring that the absenteeism is low, or has there been?
You know, I hate to even venture to guess that, not that I'm aware of. I mean, I couldn't tell you specifically it's because of this particular reason. I'm not really sure. I know that the schools work really hard, and we emphasize that we need to have the kids there every single day. And I know that our pupil services department is out there working with them, trying to make sure the kids are in school, and if they don't show up, going to find out why they're not in class. But, I mean, there's no specific, I couldn't tell you there's a specific person, because if there were, we would take care of it.
And we used to have a, drop out, when we'd get in the bus and we'd go and incentivize kids to stay in school. And
Yes.
yeah, we're not doing those at all as well, as far as I know. We've suspended those.
I'm not sure, Joe, Joe, can you talk about that?
We've changed our strategies because of the compulsory attendance laws. That's why you see kind of the gaps in those. We no longer can take or hold parents or students accountable to those. It's now a civil matter. So you can attribute some of the loss of revenue to the fact that we can no longer prosecute our students or hold them accountable.
Well, that might be the shift then, because that's
Could be.
relatively new.
Could be. And suspensions can be an issue as well.
Yeah, and I do agree that, and I forgot to think about that, but that is very true. But you can also see that even though if we go back to 12, 13, that there's, it was starting a little while ago. I mean, that kind of changed, whatever it is. But what Joe said is exactly right. I mean, that's, makes a big difference when you don't have to go to talk to a judge about your kids not being in school. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide if that's okay. All right, so, and I think I'm going to move forward a second because I think this is the last slide. Yeah, so there's, as y'all know, there are a couple of ways of balancing a budget. One of them is through making sure you get more revenue coming in. The other way is to cutting your expenses. And so we've talked about the revenue a little bit, how to raise that, how to increase it by going through and doing a tax rate increase as one of the options. The other options that we have that we've talked about a little bit that we think will help is one of the things that's up here is talking about doing an immediate hiring freeze on non-essential positions. Other districts have already been doing that. I can tell you that one of the conversations that we had with Northeast, or one of my staff members had with Northeast, was exactly that. They were looking at their staffing for this year and saying, if we don't need to hire them, we're not going to hire them. And the idea is to build up that fund balance. So when it does take a hit, you have more there so it doesn't bring you down too low. And obviously they're looking at next year's, and that's the other thing we're looking at, and we have been for a while, is looking at next year's personnel, our programs for next year. Do we want to make changes? We have to make changes. I mean, based on the numbers you saw up there, I don't think we have a choice. We have to do something. We can't continue, we cannot operate like this because the district will be, and I know I've said this before and I hate using this word, but if you operate like that, the district will be bankrupt within a couple of years. And that's not a place that anybody wants to be. So we have to be proactive, and unfortunately, because we have set ourselves up a little bit for different reasons, part of it, like I said, because we're opening new schools and new programs, and also because of the raise, we've made that gap even larger, where now we have to, it's gonna be painful. It's not gonna be easy. If we're gonna go the cutting expense way, and we decide we're not gonna do anything with the tax rate, which is definitely an option, then it's going to be painful. If you can imagine, last year to get to $5 million, we cut approximately 77 teaching positions. And I'm not saying we're going to cut teaching positions. I don't want you to think that right away. But I'm just trying to equate it to you. If we're trying to get to where, let's say that our number that we end up as a deficit based on property value increases ends up being $12 million or $11 million, then to be able to get to even halfway there to say, okay, well, we'll try to see if we can manage a $4 or $5 million hit to our fund balance. That means we're going to have to find another 70 or 80, $60,000 jobs on average to be able to get there. And if you're not going to hit the $60,000 jobs, then it's going to be even a larger number because you're going to have to find a lot of more of the less expensive positions to get there. So that's an option. We'll definitely look at our operating budgets to see what can we cut. But if y'all can remember, we've been cutting them every year. We've been cutting them and cutting them. So there becomes a point where it's very hard to cut anymore. We did cut a program, which will save us a little bit of money. It's not going to save our budget, but it will help. And that's the budget, the program that y'all cut. But like I said, it's not going to be where it's going to just totally save our budget. The early college program, as we're talking about, right? Some expenses there that we are going to forego. Yes, ma'am.
Non-essential personnel positions?
Yes.
Because I could probably justify every position as essential.
Yeah.
So, just for example, you just mentioned early college, and I know there were some shifts in positions that Dr. Montoya made that actually created a vacancy. So that can be considered a non-essential personnel since we got rid of the program. Is that what we're talking about, those types of positions?
Well, for this year, ma'am, one of the things would be at some point it's not viable to hire somebody in a paraprofessional position, for example, if they're only going to have a salary for 12 weeks for the remainder of the school year. You reach that tipping point where it doesn't really behoove us to hire that person because then they'll have to pay their benefits through the end of the summer.
Right.
So we typically, in our department, we kind of reach that point where we say, and it happens later, maybe closer to April, where we say, okay, we hired this person, they get 3 paychecks and still have to pay for benefits through whatever if they should decide to do that. So that's one aspect. But I would say at this point, for the remainder of the 17-18 year, it would be all positions with the exception of teachers, perhaps custodians, which direct classroom positions that need to get us to the remainder of the year. Now, what does that mean for 18-19? That would be something that we have to discuss.
And obviously for 18-19, we're looking at, I mean, everything. I mean, we're looking at all, it didn't matter what position it is, at all positions from all levels, and saying, hey, and obviously we're trying to stay away from the classroom, because that's what we've already made a change there last year, and we want to stay away from the classroom. So we're trying to get everywhere else first, but unfortunately, y'all know that the majority of our expenses are related somehow to the classroom. And so eventually we may have to get there, but we're definitely, that would be the last on the, you know, in the level of priority. So that's the process we're gonna go through. We have been going through and gonna continue to go through and identify some actual positions so we can bring back to the board, and you all can either tell us you're going in the right direction or you're going in the wrong direction. So we can figure out how we wanna get there. It's not a, like I said, it's not gonna be at all a enjoyable process at all this year to do budget. And like I said, we saw it coming last year, and we knew we were gonna get there. And you know, and I don't know what to tell you about the state. If y'all have been reading some of the articles too, I know I was at a meeting 2 months ago, three months ago in Austin, and the state comptroller, the assistant to the state comptroller, was telling us that, you know, next year's gonna be, the next biennium may even be worse than this year. And they're talking about things because of like Hurricane Harvey, that while everybody's thinking, oh, there's some money there in the rainy day fund that they call it, or that maybe they can take some of that and distribute to other school districts. Well, if y'all are following some of the news too, because in Houston ISD, I think the number is $280 million, either 208 or $280 million, that they're gonna have to cut. And they're just in a world of hurt, and some of that was because of the hurricane, and for other reasons as well. But I can't even imagine, I mean, I know their budget is a lot larger than ours, but I can't even imagine trying to get to $280 million. So, like I said, we'll do our best to try to come up with some options, but it's gonna be very challenging to get to where we always strive for that balanced budget. I can tell you right now, that's not gonna happen. Unless, well, I shouldn't say that. If the board decides we're gonna do a 5-cent or more tax rate increase and the voters say yes, then yeah, I could be wrong and that could happen. But short of something like that, then if it's just doing, managing through expense reduction, then we're not gonna be able to get there. That, in that article that I was reading from Houston a few days ago, it said something about their life is gonna change the school district life is gonna change, because, I mean, they're doing things like, they're gonna reduce total number of bus drivers, and the kids are just gonna ride the buses longer. They're gonna have to just wait until they can pick them up. They're just gonna do all kinds of things like that because they're gonna have to reduce their costs significantly. So like I said, we'll look at it, bring back some ideas. But in the interim, we just wanted to talk to y'all about this, the hiring freeze on these non-essential positions, wherever we can talk to the cabinet members and agree that, okay, it's okay not to hire that position right now. We may have to get a sub in there or somebody that's a little less expensive to get us through the year to try to save a little bit of money. We're going to look at, I know that in the past our utility consumption, we've done some different things with the set points, especially in the summer, as to how hot we can keep buildings and things like that. So we'll go back and review some of that to try to save some money there. I know our energy management department has shared some ideas that they have, and I think they can help us a little bit. I mean, it's again, everything's going to help. I know in the past years, there's some things that we've looked at that we can look at again. These are just Band-Aids, and unfortunately they come back. And that is, if you remember, like our workers' compensation program, we're self-funded. So we have a decent fund balance in that program. A few years back, for like 3 or 4 years consecutively, we stopped contributing to the program, and that annually is about $1.2 million. And we don't have to do, I was talking to the director of accounting, and she said, well, maybe not doing a complete, where we're not doing it, but maybe we can bring the rates really low so we can still have contributing something to it. So we can look at different ideas and try to come up with other ways where it's not impacting our employees. But eventually, unfortunately, I think like I said, if it's going to be done through expenditure reduction, it's going to affect the staff, because that's where our money's at. Yes, ma'am.
Something I was looking for when I was going through the information provided is, do we have any type of recycling program whereby we recoup, you know, like when we change out the computers and stuff, do we sell them to a company and recoup the funds, or furniture, books? Do we have anything like that?
We do have recycling programs, like your question about the computers. There is a company that we use for that. They rebate us back and dollars that we can use back to buy certain equipment and things like that. And to be honest, it's not a lot of money, because whenever we get rid of a computer, we have some requirements that they have to do. First of all, they have to make sure that whatever they do is that they're disposing of the materials that are hazardous properly. They just can't go and take it to the salvage yard and throw it there. The other thing is, like our hard drives and things like that, we require that they do certain things with them. Sometimes on certain computers that they drill holes through them, things so that nobody can go back and access some of that data. So it's not just where they get to pick it up and take it to the salvage yard and make some money and give us some back. In the old days, that's the way it worked. But now that everybody is and should be, very environmentally conscious, a lot of the materials in computers, or some materials in computers, are dangerous to the environment, so there's some protocols to how to handle them. So we do try to pick up money where we can. Whenever we have, just broken chairs and we can take the metal off, we do try to get it salvaged so we can get some of that back. But compared to our budget, I mean, we're talking about, truthfully, $13,000, $15,000 a year. It's really, really minimal compared to, we have auctions for our surplus stuff that we don't use to try to sell it that way. And even our buses, we try to sell those through surplus, so we get some money from those. But again, if you sell a bus, a brand new bus costs $90,000 to $100,000 plus. When we sell them at auction, $1,500 to $3,000. Because they're old, we keep them for 15 years, so most of them don't even run. They have to be towed away. So we try to do what we can to make sure we get pennies from everywhere we can, but it's just not a lot of money. Sure. Yes, ma'am.
Speaking of that, the advertising that was on the buses, is that still a program that we use? Does that help any?
We had to follow up we'd have to get back with you on that, because we hired a company to do that, and there was some issues with that company, within that company. And so we really didn't recoup a lot of the monies. And I think the program has stopped, right? It really hasn't, it has been stopped, and we haven't done anything with it anymore since that time. Right, but, and we've talked to other districts about that in the past, and we can definitely look at it again. But it's not, again, and I appreciate it, and we're trying to get anything we can from anywhere. But it's not a huge moneymaker either, right? I mean, again, annually, $30,000, and again, $30,000 is one position so we definitely want the money, but it's not a big moneymaker. Yes, ma'am.
If we decided to pursue the tax rate increase, what's the timeline for getting that on the ballot? Do we even have a window for that?
We've done a little bit of research on it, not a lot, because it's not my favorite way to go, but, unfortunately, I don't know, we may not have a choice. It's called a tax ratification election, and there are some steps that have to occur. There are some timelines, and so let me do this before I just kind of share some information and maybe give you the wrong information. Let me put something on a little chart, and then we'll send it to the board, and we can talk about it at the next meeting if y'all like, or at the next budget meeting for sure, so we can kind of give you some ideas as to if that's an option, and kind of what timelines we'd have to meet to do that.
Thank you.
Sure, and there is another thing, though, related to, and I'm sorry, Mr. Macias, let me get your question first, and I'll tell you what I was going to say. It's not with doesn't have anything to do with the tax rate, but it does have to do with looking at staff. We'll have to get with the attorneys, because there's two ways that you can reduce staff, unless, other than attrition, which is the best way to do it. But if you can't do it through attrition, and you have to actually non-renew people or not extend contracts and things like that, then the two ways are through declaring either a financial exigency, which we're not at the point of doing that yet, or through what's called a program change. And to do a program change requires that the board take a couple of steps, and it has to be, I think it's over 2 board meetings. So at the next meeting in March, we may bring that as an agenda item to the board to discuss. And whether we act on it or not, just because you approve for us to do a program change doesn't mean we necessarily have to eliminating positions. But at least it'll be in place, because if we go that route, if you don't do it, then you'll lose the opportunity to be able to do it. So we just want to have it in place so that if we need to go that route, it's there and we can use it. But definitely we can bring it at the next meeting, and y'all can discuss it, if you need to with the attorneys. We'll do our best to provide as much information as we can. But if you need more, the attorneys can definitely help with that. Yes, sir, Mr. Macias.
Thank you, Mr. Elizondo. Your financial reports and budget discussions last year, you were real good at providing a 2, even a 3-year projection of what our budgets might look like. And so I would be interested in looking at that further as well as we go along, because I'm certain that that'll be part of everything. But I remember last year that you had put these buckets of expenditures, like the incentive, the pay raise, and Veterans Memorial, all of these expenses that were adding to, of course, the bottom line. This time I wanted to kind of get a better understanding of what the cost is for opening Worthing Oaks and Escondido North, specifically to see how that's impacting our budget. What we learned with Veterans Memorial is that we overstaffed it. That's still my opinion, that we ended up putting full-time positions there for half of the students that were enrolled there, when we probably could have done maybe 50%. So I'm not saying that's probably the solution, but it's something for us to examine in terms of minimizing our expenses at both of those facilities as we move forward. Now, I'm assuming that 2018, 2019 will see some impact from those schools getting ready to open. Am I correct?
Yes, and let me back up a little bit. I'm not sure exactly where the overstaffing perception is or for Veterans Memorial, because what you suggested is exactly what we did. When we looked at that school, we have a standard for how we staff every school. And when we looked at Veterans Memorial, we cut them way back. Even when we looked at the staffing allocation formula, we were like, well, they need to get this many, for instance, coaches or whatever. And we said, oh, they're not going to do that. We're not going to give it to them. They're going to have to wait until the kids show up or we see them. They're not going to get it. As a matter of fact, we had programs over there that we were supposed to open that first year that we completely said, we're not going to do it. They're going to have to wait because there's only 12 kids or 13 kids or 14. So we cut way back. So I can assure you that when we opened that school, we went back and forth. And I know that even the principal at that time was really upset with us because we were just telling them, sorry, you're going to have to figure it out. You're going to do it yourself because we're not going to do it. And even their bookkeeper and stuff, we were like, nope, you don't get one. They just barely are getting one because there wasn't enough for them to do that. And as far as the 2 elementary schools, we will go back and look at them a little bit, only because for the one that's opening mid-year, we have some costs in there. And again, we're going to go back and evaluate a little bit. Again, it will save us a little bit of money, but not a lot, because some positions we're going to hire at the beginning of the year, and some we're going to hire a little bit later. But when we did our budget, we put them all as going full-time at the beginning of the year. Again, it's not going to be very much because it's not very much of that staff. The majority of the staff that's going to be at these 2 new elementary schools are being transferred from existing elementary schools. So the majority of teachers that are going to be going to Escondido are going to be coming from Masters, and the majority of teachers that are going to be going to Wortham are going to be going from Rolling Meadows. There is, of course, a principal. We're not giving them any vice principals because they're going to be too small, so we're not letting them have any. They may share one if they're depending on what numbers they hit, because there's targets for that as well. So we're trying to be very mindful of the budget situation that we're in. And even if, and to be honest with you, it doesn't matter what budget situation we're in. Even if we had plenty of money, we still would do the same thing. We would look at it and say, hey, is it necessary? If it's not necessary, we're not going to do it until it is necessary. That's always just been the way we've always operated. And I think that that's a responsible way of doing it, so we would continue to do that. But I'm sorry, you were going to ask about 1819 now.
No, I mean, that's absolutely good. So we have a focus on that, and to ensure, I can tell you that that may save some additional dollars for sure. But my impression always is when we're expanding that there's a need for that expansion, which means I anticipate we should see new students at these schools, and which means our enrollment should increase. If all we're doing is shifting students and personnel from one elementary to another, I don't think that's what the perception is. The truth of the matter is these communities are growing and we should see new students, which means then the bottom line should see some increased revenue with increased ADA and students, which again offset the expenses. I'm looking for a strong forecast on that, because I will tell you again, back to the Veterans Memorial, I think we forecasted a certain enrollment and we didn't hit those targets.
Oh, that's true.
And so that's another question I'll have too as we go through this. Are we hitting those targets? You don't have to answer that now, but that's just something that's crossed my mind, so that we are efficient throughout the district. And so naturally, if we are at the optimal efficiency, we will have the revenue and the expenses that balance it. So that being said, our biggest challenge, colleagues, is that we need to still be competitive in ensuring that we retain the right talent here, but not go over budget. And so if we compromise our budget, we have a tendency potentially to lose personnel. And then, of course, when you talk about other choices, charters and whatnot, people go there because they're dissatisfied with the ISDs that are currently doing what they're doing. So we need to still provide the best service we can. And I would say, too, just my 2 cents, if we're going to go with a tax rate increase, that we probably should hit closer to that fund balance minimum, which I think you said was 25 million, before we say we don't have anything further to do. We want to keep it at 3 months. Right now, we still have some latitude with our fund balance. My hope is that once we are fully operational with Wortham Oaks and Escondido North, that we'll see those potential expenses of expansion alleviate and give us a better picture of what our sustainability would be in budgeting over the next 2 or 3 years. So that's why we'd be really interested to see what 2019, 2020 looks like at the next couple of years in terms of what those projected expenses would be. This isn't easy, and naturally, if we have to do a tax rate increase, we have to do it, but we have a lot of work to do. And the last thing I'll say, too, is that I know that we've started our internal audit with HR. HR, as you mentioned, is 80% essentially of our budget expenditures. So if there is money to be saved in terms of looking for efficiency, it's going to be found in HR. If 80% of our money goes out in payroll, where and what do we need to do to be more efficient? And so that's where I think we'll realize some savings. And we've discussed it before, reducing days. Simply just reducing 5 to 10 days that's significant if you look at the math and all of that. So we have to see those, and I don't know if you're going to propose any of that in the budget discussions, but payroll's our biggest one. So anyway, this is just discussion one. I don't expect to answer all that. But
well, just to kind of answer some of those things, we as a cabinet have looked at looking at furloughing, or cutting the 5 days here or whatever. We haven't shared, that I'm aware of, we didn't share anything with the board members. Maybe somebody did, but I know we haven't through our office.
I'm saying that they did, but it's just
okay.
Something that I'm...
Sure, so we've looked at that, and we've talked about, whether that's fair, not fair, all the different things that come along with that. As far as the students at the 2 new elementary schools, I mean, yes, we're building the schools because we're definitely hoping that those schools at one point get filled to capacity. Of course, Dr. Fields probably want not at capacity, but anyway, that they get filled. So we are hoping that, right, there you go, that's a good word. So yeah, that is our goal as well. And when those kiddos come, we'll definitely have to have some more expenses because we'll have to hire some more teachers, obviously, which is okay, but that's the way it's supposed to work. So we will look forward to that. But like you said, it's growing. So it's a timing thing. So even though we're opening the schools right now, it may be 3 years or 4 before we have them at those optimum capacity levels. And we are looking, even when we open veterans, going back to your comment about that, when we were staffing that school, we had the opportunity because kids registered in advance before they went over there, like in the spring semester, early spring. So when we're staffing the school, we were looking at actual counts. How many kids registered for this class? How many kids registered for that class? So we knew how to staff it to make sure that we didn't overstaff for the same reason we didn't want to put a lot of staff members over there. And we've been doing that every year. Even for next year, we're like, okay, how many kids are at Kitty Hawk? They're going to be going over there, so we know how many staff members we need to add in the 8th grade. That are going to be going to the 9th grade. So we do that. I want to reassure you that we are always mindful of trying to make our dollars go as far as possible. And I agree with you that we do have to be competitive. We have them. That's the way to make sure we retain good quality staff. We just have to be, it's just we have to find that balance between being competitive and going bankrupt. And so that's the challenge that we have to do. So we'll definitely try to do our part, and we just ask that y'all please help us with what y'all can help us with. and making sure that we try to reach that. Oh, and I'm sorry. Can I add one more thing? At the last board meeting, there were a number of coaches that came and spoke about, and I know Ms. Michelle had asked this question, and I meant to cover it a little while ago, and I just remembered right now, about that. And so, and their concern or their discussion happened to center around coaches and how many planning periods they have, or how many coaching periods they have, better said, if they're in athletic, if they're coaches for athletic, certain particular sports. And so there was a discussion and some comments made, I think when we shared the master schedules, about, hey, you know, how many periods do people have off, and even when we're reducing the student-to-teacher ratio at the elementary school, saying, hey, well, you know, we got to make sure that everybody's doing their fair share here. We can't have people. So we talked about it here in the boardroom, and we talked about it as well, and that's how it got to the, you know, to our coaches saying, are you guys going to cut our periods? And so that's why that discussion came up, that you were asking, how did this happen? What transitioned that trans? So we're definitely going to have those discussions, and then it's ultimately going to be up to the board to decide, yes, we're going to do this, no, we're not going to do that, because we're not going to make, well, we'll make recommendations, obviously, but the board's at the end going to tell us, you know, whatever y'all want to do with anything that we're going to change from what we're doing currently. Does that kind of answer that question?
Yeah, because that was a surprise.
Sure.
You know, for all those coaches to come up, and we had that item on the agenda, and then it got pulled, so I still didn't know.
Sure.
Was it something that was going to be considered or not? And that's why I asked, would that be put on the agenda for the next?
Sure. So if it's okay with you, we will definitely, but instead of putting it in the regular board meeting, we'll just put it at the next workshop, and then we can talk about it, and the board can share, you know, y'all's, what y'all would like about that.
And I know when that came up originally, it was just a comment, like
It
you
was
don't
a
want an
comment.
8-to-1 coaching ratio in athletic periods.
Right.
When you have 24-to-1 in an elementary class.
Right.
It was not about removing athletic periods, but it is about looking at the ratio.
Sure.
If you have 10 coaches with 30 kids, I mean, that's obviously 3-to-1 ratio. That's not something that would be acceptable.
Sure.
But certainly, we know how important athletic periods are. But it's also about looking at the ratio of coaches to students.
And I just have a comment. I'm going to get back on my soapbox again. It won't help us set this year's budget, but it's something that the public and that we can do immediately, which is to vote. If you want to make a change in how the state funds public education, you have to vote for legislators at the state level who support public education. I will not tell you who to vote for. I will tell you about a website that has done absolutely a fabulous job of evaluating positions and previous voting history of everybody running for office, and it's called TexansForPublicEducation.com. And if you go there and look, you can see who you're voting for and who is out there on record supporting public education. We have to make a change at the state legislature in order for something to happen so that our state funding increases. And that's my soapbox. I'll step off.
Okay, if there's no further comments, we'll move on to item 5. This board will.
Item 4.
I'm sorry, item 4, discussion, I'm sorry, Joe, I was going to skip you. Discussion regarding the District of Innovation Plan.
Again, the board members, we've had this initial presentation, but Mr. Gonzalez will bring the next piece to the table here for you.
I guess you would skip me. Next time I want to go ahead of Jose after. What you have before you is a local plan of innovation or a local innovation plan. What we're basically telling you is that we are now ready to put this plan on our website for the next 30 days, and that we are going to contact the board, the Commissioner of Education, to let him know that there's intent to take this plan back to you after the 30 days are up and have you vote on the plan. So it's there for you to review. If you have any comments or questions, it'll also be on the website for our public to view. Our committee did a great job. Some of our committee members are here tonight. If you're here tonight and you were on the District of Innovation Committee, stand up or raise your hand. I will ask more of those committee members to be here when we do vote in March. for this plan, and that will help us with the start date and with our, with looking for librarians, with our new plan that will address certifications. So if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer those now.
Because that was my suggestion. I would like us to make sure that if and when this does go into effect, that we're considering people who are already in a program, getting their library media specialist training, so that we have that commitment to those people first, before we just look at a teacher who may want to start a program and become a librarian immediately. And I think we have some that maybe already are doing that, or may consider, joining it and then looking for an opening for us later.
And we did have that input from various committee members in conjunction with our Human Resource Department.
That will then affect how the plan is actually implemented in the hiring stage.
It will be a strategy that we can use, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, the board will now adjourn into closed session. 5A, pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.071, consultation with the school district attorney regarding pending litigation related to cause number 516-CV-00832-XR, Alton Crane versus Judson Independent School District in the United States District Court for the Western District of Texas, San Antonio Division. 5B, pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074, discuss JECA principle. 5C, pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.071, attorney consultation regarding legal issues related to superintendent transition, including but not limited to possible RFP for superintendent search firms. 5D, pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074, consider and discuss superintendent transition, and the time is 8:12 p.m.